Okay, so this is what we are going to build, which is similar to what we're going to be doing in Trip Planner, a little bit more simplistic, which is that there's three entities in this application. There are days, and a day can have an office visit and a store visit. And we also have offices and stores. So in other words, what I can do here is that if I wanted to change my office visit from the Empire State Building office to the Full Stack office, I could end up doing that. If I wanted to do no office visits, I could click on this. If I wanted to do no store visits, I could click on this. If I wanted to add a store, I could do that. If I wanted to change a store, I could do that. So the model that we're looking at, if we start to think about the entities of our application, and some of them we've had already because this was done previously, we already have offices and stores. Now we're adding the concept of days, okay? And we have a collection of days that we're showing. We can navigate to different days. And within each day, we have an office and a store. Could just be an office, could just be a store, could be nothing, okay? And that's what we're going to end up building. And I'm going to start out from where we left off with our demo here, which was the offices, stores, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say git.clone, and I'll say Acme offices, stores, live demo. And I'm going to CD into that. Okay. Now, if I want to basically create a new repository here that I want to push up, which I want to do, one thing I could always do is just get rid of my Git repo. And I could go over here and just initialize it again. And now I've got a Git repo that I can end up pushing up, which I'll end up doing. Okay. So right now, if I just run this, and let's open it up, we can take a look at it. If you remember from this is sort of standard stuff, all stuff that we've looked at. We've got our DB object, we've got an office, we've got a store. Each of these has a place, which we really aren't going to be using all that much. In terms of our views, we've got this index page. We're using Google Maps, although we probably will stop using it. For this, we could maybe add it in later on. We've got two forms with select objects. Nothing really is wired up here. If I go to run this and I say npm run,
You have to install.
thank you, npm install, npm run start dev. And the way that this is set up here, I'm going to modify something in a second, but if I look at this, localhost 3000, here's where we are at the moment. Nothing really dynamic here, but here are all my offices, and here are all my stores. So there's a couple things that I'm going to need to do. One of them is that I don't have any JavaScript file running at the moment. So I'm going to start out by going in here, and I'm going to create a folder called public. And within this folder, I'm going to create an app.js file. Just put that in there for the moment. And let me go back to my server. And I've got a static route for vendor. I'm going to put a static route in here for public. Public. And I'm going to go over here to my views. And I'm going to put a script tag in here for source /public app.js script. And I'll go over here and reload this page. And I see my hello, meaning this ended up running. Okay. Now, a couple of things that I want to do here is that if you look at my package JSON file, I'm actually running every time that a JavaScript file changes, my server is running. The fact is, I don't need to restart my server when I make changes to my app.js file. So I'm just going to go over here, and when I specify nodemon, I'm going to say just ignore the public folder. I'll save that. Let me kill this, and I'm going to run this again. And what that'll mean is that if I end up changing this to a console log, and I go back here, my server is not going to restart. I'm not going to see any sort of delay here, which is going to make my life a little bit easier. Let me open up my console here. Let's just sort of think about a couple things here. There really are only two things that we really care about in this app. One of them being a collection of days, and one of them being what the current day is. Okay? One way to sort of think about it is that this state, what the current day is, and what the days are, really determines what our UI is going to look like. Okay? So, and I'm picking this word state because a lot of the frameworks use this terminology. React calls it state, Angular calls it scope, similar things. What I want to do here is, first of all, go in here and just specify my state. And I'm going to say I have an IDX, and I'm going to start off on my first day. And I'm going to have a collection of days, nothing which exists at the moment. If I do a console.log for state, I go back here, I'll see that I have my days. Okay? Now let me just show you something that I want to do. Instead of actually setting it up so that I actually have to build ways to get offices and stores into particular days or have to create days, let me start out with some data. One problem that I'm going to run into is that if I wanted to do something like this, well, I've got a day, and for this first day, I'm going to say my office visit is going to be offices 1, whatever that is. Okay? If I went to do that and I went to run this again, it would tell me it doesn't know what offices is. Now, let's actually just see where that is. If I go back to my views, I actually am outputting my offices. This is actually coming back from the server, and it's over here. The problem is that it's all the way here at the bottom. My script is here at the top. If I want this script to run after everything else has loaded, I could simply put a tag in here called defer. And now if I go back here, I'll see that here's my day. My day has an object, and there's a office, which is going to be the ESB office, which is the second one, right? So let's add a couple more of these. We'll say that there's a store here. Now, stores doesn't exist yet, just because I haven't output it. If I go back to index, I did this for offices. Again, this was just to test out Google Maps. I'll do it for stores. So again, this is Swig. Swig is being passed stores. It's outputting them basically as raw JSON data. If you wanted to see it, all you need to do is to look at your page source. And you could see here are my offices and here are my stores. Okay? So let's go back to my app, which is really what we're going to be working with. I've got one day. Let's put in another day, and we'll modify this. I don't think I have 3 stores, so let me make this 1. I'll make this 0 and 0. And our second day will be very light, no office and no stores. Now, again, from a modeling perspective, what I would say is that on each day, I have the ability to set up a visit to a store and an office, but neither one of those is required. That's the way that I would specify that this is the way that this is set up. So at this point, if I go back and browse to this, I can see that I have 3 items in my days. Well, let's start setting up.
Excuse me? Just a quick question. You created app.js. App.js is merely you created a variable so that you can do something with it later.
Correct.
And in state, you're creating the data to be able to populate into the days.
Yeah, and let's just sort of be clear about this too. Ideally, this is not coming from here. We're not hard coding this. This is going to be coming from our database at some point.
Doing this
Just doing this because we don't really have anything in our database about a day or an office visit or a store visit. That'll be the next demo that I end up doing. So let's go over here and let's create an object. Okay? And this is going to be something called the day picker. What I'm focusing on here is creating this thing, okay? 1, 2, and 3. This is going to be my day picker. Now, what I want to do, what I'm looking at doing here, is I want my day picker to be responsible for one thing and one thing only: rendering HTML. That's what I want it to do. I want it to be fairly dumb, okay? I want it to pass it everything that it needs. Meaning that I'm going to pass to my day picker, it needs 3 things. I'm going to pass to it a container ID. I'm going to pass to it a number of days. And I'm going to pass to it an index. Okay? Now, just for starters, I'm going to call day picker. And I'm going to pass it a ID for my day picker. I'll pass in state.days, state IDX. Okay? So day picker is a very simplistic function. And what I want to do is I want to use jQuery just to see if this is working. What I'm going to do over here is I'm going to go right below my add store visit here. And I'm going to put a div here and give this an ID of day picker. And I'll put in day picker. Right now, nothing really is going to change. If I go to this, I'll see that I have my day picker. Nothing really changed. Now, one of the things that I want to do is I want to use jQuery. What I always tell people is that if you're using jQuery, make sure you could find what you're looking for. So I'm going to create a variable called container, which is really going to be, I'm going to get this from my container ID. And I'm going to tell my container, again, if jQuery is stored here, I'm going to say, hey, look, just hide yourself slowly, so I could see you slowly disappear. Okay? Of course, this is going to be problematic because $ doesn't exist. Let's install jQuery. So I'm going to go over here, npm install jQuery, save. And if I look and I see where jQuery gets installed, I could go over here and see under node modules, I've got jQuery, and under dist, it's got jQuery.js. So what this gives me the ability to do is to go over here the same way that I'm bringing in any of these other script tags, script, source, vendor, jQuery, dist, jQuery.js. And this is basically just going to be a global variable for jQuery and that $, in which case I should be able to go over here. Notice my day picker went away slowly. Okay? Make sure you could find what you're looking for. Now, exactly what do I want to do here with my day picker? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this up in parts. Now, remember what I told you? I want this to be very sort of simplistic. I only want it to render the DOM. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify, hey, look, here's a number of list items. And these list items are going to be days.map. This is going to be a day. And when I use map, I could also get an index. And I don't want it to interfere with the index that I passed in. So I'm going to call this IDX. And then I'm going to go over here. And what I'm going to end up returning from here, I'm going to use my ES6 here, thank you. And this is going to be LI. And I want this to be sort of a navigational tab, so it's going to be a link. And I'll say $, IDX, end of LI. Okay? So if I just said console.log LIs, I would see I've got these list items with 0, 1, and 2. I really want it to be 1, 2, and 3, right? So I'm just going to say IDX plus 1. Thank you. So here, thank you. So my link element should be closed here as well. Okay? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, here's an unordered list. So I'm using jQuery now. And I'm going to say to jQuery, hey, look, create and I'm going to use my backticks here. I'm going to say UL class nav tabs. And I'm going to take these LIs and I'm just going to join them because I just want to get a string of those list items. And I'm going to close my unordered list. And this is now jQuery being used to basically generate some HTML. If I said console.log UL, I would see that I have my jQuery wrapped set. If I said .html, I would see my HTML. Let's just see why I don't see my... Oh, because that's the interior of the HTML. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to specify container .append. This is something else you could do with jQuery. My unordered list. And I'll do that. And what I should see at this point are 3 days. Now, something that is a little screwed up is that if I call this twice, which I am going to end up calling it multiple times. Every time I call it, I get a new list. What I really want to do is that when I go to render the day picker, tell my container, hey, look, container, empty yourself, please. And this way I now have my 3 days. Now, what I also want to do is I also want to specify a day that is the highlighted day. Right? So when I render the day picker, I don't want to render just the individual days. I want to specify which day is going to be the selected day. So what I'm going to do here is I've passed in my IDX value. I'm going to say if the IDX is equal to this IDX, I'm going to simply return. The only difference is I'll say class equals active. Okay, so I'm mapping my days to my list items. This is what this day picker is good for. It's good for rendering out a view. So I come here and I could see my first day is selected. If I went over here just for the sake of argument and I change this to 1, I would see my second day is selected. Now the question is, what do we want to do when a day ends up getting clicked on? Well, I could put some logic in my day picker, but instead of putting logic in my day picker, let's actually first wire this up. And the way that we're going to end up doing that is that we're going to specify, hey look, we'll start out like this. We'll specify, instead of putting these handlers directly on our list items, let's specify, hey look, UL, when you are clicked on, but not you, your list items. I want to call some function. And I'll say console.log this, and what this will tell me is that I've clicked on the second list item, third list item, or even first list item. You can see that with the class of active. What I want to know here is what's the index of the list item that I clicked on. And very simply, if I take this and I wrap it as a jQuery object, jQuery has the ability of telling me, hey look, you clicked on an item that has a number of siblings. Where do you fall in the group of siblings? And I could go over here and say console.log index. Again, jQuery is not magic. It's just wrapping around native DOM methods that have the ability to do this. And now, if I do this, I can click on these items and find the index. Now, what do I want to do with that? Well, there's another parameter that I'm going to pass in here. On select day. And if I go over here, I'm going to call on select day, and I'm going to pass in this index. Now, right now, if I went to run this, and I click on this, it'll tell me on select day doesn't exist. So let's go over here, and we'll create a function called on select day. We're passing in some index. What do we want to happen when we end up selecting a day? Well, at that point, our state is going to be changing. And we're going to specify, hey, look, state.idx equals whatever idx got passed in. And let's just do a console.log of idx here to see if that worked. And let's make sure that we pass to this on select day. Okay? So again, the takeaway here is that this thing is pretty dumb. Okay? We're passing it exactly what it needs to render itself. And since something interesting is going to happen in here, we're telling it what method to call, which we are passing in here. And now we could go over here, and this should tell me that this is 1 and this is 2. It'll tell me 0. Okay? And what I want to do here, I'm going to wrap this call to my day picker, just so I can reference it in an easy way. And I'll call it, hey, look, render day picker. When my app loads, I'm going to call render day picker, and I'll be in the exact same boat that I was in before. My day picker is rendered. Still, though, you notice it's not changing the day. But notice I've come back up here. I've changed my state object, which is really controlling my application. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to specify, hey, look, render day picker. No applause, please. Wait till the end, the performance. The thing that I want to get at here is that this, if you look at this, okay, there's a bit of a something important that's going on here. This day picker function is not doing all that much except rendering the UI. Okay? We're passing everything it needs. Okay? We don't tell the day picker, hey, look, day picker, change your class to active or anything like that. We don't do it that way. We pass it in a method, we tell it to call this method, then we render the day picker. We call this dumb. The day picker is pretty dumb. Okay? It knows how to render itself, and it knows when to tell us something interesting ended up happening. Okay? Once we've got our day picker rendered, we could also think about what else we might want to render. Okay? So on the same way that we've got a day picker, how about we also have a day view? Day view is also going to have a container ID. Okay? A day view is not going to be concerned with a collection of days. A day view is going to be concerned with a day, right? So the same way that we have a render day picker, right? We also might want to decide, hey, look, when someone ends up selecting a day, we're going to end up doing something similar. We'll have a function, render day view. And the render day view is going to end up the same way that the render day picker calls day picker. Here we'll end up calling day view. We'll call day view. Doesn't exist yet with day view. And we're going to pass in our state.days, state IDX for that particular day. So when we end up rendering our day picker, we'll also specify, hey, look, we rendered our day picker. From here, we'll say render your day view as well, right? If the day picker is rendered and the day picker has an index, then we know what the current day is, and we can render day view. This should not break anything, I hope. Let's go over here, and let's just take a look, make sure that this is getting called. We'll say console.log container ID. And if we go over here, we'll see we have day view, but there's no day view on our page. So let's go to our index, and right under where we have our day picker, we're going to put in our day view. And let's go over here, and just to see that that's working, we'll say container equals $ container ID, and we'll say container hide slow. And you can see my day view goes away gracefully. Well, let's set up our day view. What we're going to do, we'll specify that our office visit is going to be day.office. Store visit is going to be day.store. And what we could end up doing with this is that we could specify if you are, we'll create a list item, we'll say store item. If in fact we've got a store visit, this is going to be a list item. We'll give this a class of list group item. This is just a bootstrap class. And we'll specify store visit, just for simplicity, .name. list item. Otherwise, we'll have nothing over here. On the same token, we'll say office item. We'll say if there's an office visit, then what we're going to do, oh yeah, thank you. Someone said an I, all right. And this is going to be office visit dot name. And then what we'll end up doing, similar to what we did before, UL $, UL, I'm going to give this a class of list group so it shows up kind of nicely. And I'll go over here and specify in here, this will be my store item if I have one, because if not, it'll just be an empty. Office item, UL, close that. And let's just actually put over here so we can see it, store, office. And we'll go over here and we'll say container.append UL, right? So these are all jQuery methods. And so when we render our day picker, we'll end up rendering our day view. And let's see if this works. So as we move to different days, one of the problems that we run into is that this is going to get longer and longer. And the problem is that we also need to go up here for our day view and say container.empty. Now if we go back here, here's our first day, our second day is empty, our third day is here. Now what we want to do is add the ability to remove these visits, and then we'll wire up this part, okay? So how do we go and remove them? Let's think about what that's going to look like. So we have an on select day, right? Let's go over here and put a function. We'll say on remove office, okay? What needs to get passed through here? Not really much, because we know what our current day is. So we could specify, hey, look, state.days, state IDX, dot office equals null, right? In which case, if we ended up removing an office, we could say render day view, right? We're still on that same day. On the same token, if we end up going and we end up removing a store, we could do this, and again, we could end up rendering our day view. So how do we end up passing this in? Well, let's remember that we're going to start with offices. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to pass in on remove office, on remove store. These are two methods that I'm passing into my dumb day view. And I'm going to use a little bit of jQuery to do some selecting. So right now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give this a class, just so I could find it, of store. I'm going to give this a class of office. And I'm going to say to my list item, hey, look, when you end up getting clicked on a UL, when you're clicked on, okay, and when you're clicked on a list item with a class of store, I'm going to say on remove store, right? So I pass these in order. On remove office, on remove store. Let's just make sure I pass those in correctly. This is happening down here. right? On remove office, on remove store. Again, my dumb day view just gets these methods passed in. It's not really responsible for moving anything. It's just responsible for calling whatever ended up getting passed in. And I could do this with office. In which case, if this is done correctly, I could go over here and clean out my day for day 1 and clean out my day for day 3. And I've got a pretty empty schedule at this point. Again, the big takeaway here is not necessarily of writing this code from scratch. What I want you to see is how this is broken up. If you look at day picker or you look at day view, you could tell exactly what's happening. You could see that you're being passed 4 parameters. Okay? You could see that you're passed a container ID that you're emptying out. You could see that you're creating list items. Okay? You're creating some kind of UL, and you're attaching an event handler to the list item. Okay? This event handler that ended up getting passed in. Again, these things are fairly dumb. No business logic that's here. I pass stuff in. You output the HTML. If something is going to happen, and I want to know about it, okay, you don't change my data. Okay? You call a method, and I change my data. Okay? This is where all these methods are coming in, right? On remove store, on remove office, and so on and so forth. Now, you can imagine if we have an on remove office and an on remove store, we probably are going to want to have an on add office. On add office is going to need to get past what? An office. And on add store is going to get past a store. Now this is a little bit trickier. What I want to do here is I want to have a concept of a function, and I'm going to call this my visit picker because it's setting up my visits. Now, what I want to pass in here is, again, a container ID, and I want to pass it an odd on add office and on add store. Now, let's first of all call it, okay? We'll do console.log container ID. And let's say this is going to be, let's call it visit pickers because there's actually 2 of them that are in there. So we have visit pickers, and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say pound visit pickers. So if I go to run this, I'll see visit pickers show up. My visit pickers are all sitting up here inside this well here. So I've got these 2 wells. I want to group these together. So I'm going to give this an ID of visit pickers. Close this up. Move these over. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to make my, again, I want to make sure I can find it. So I'm going to go over here and say var container equals $ container ID container dot hide slow. And my visit pickers are gone, so at least I know I was able to find them. Well, what do I want to do with my visit pickers? My visit pickers have 2 buttons in them, okay? And what I want to do is I want to wire up these buttons. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to specify that in order to wire up these buttons, what I want to do here, and there's another way that I can grab this, is to basically say, hey, look, if you are a button with the class button, and another thing that you could end up passing to your $sign is to say, look, these are buttons that are in the container. For starters, let's just hide them. Make sure we can find them. Let's hide them first. And you see our buttons have disappeared. What I want to do is that when these buttons are clicked on, I want to do something. Okay? So for starters, I'll say console.log this. And if I click on this, I'll see a couple of things. Notice that my page is refreshing. The reason why that's happening is that if you have a form inside of a button, it'll end up causing it to post back. So one of the things that I want to do here is specify, hey, look, one of the things that gets passed to this is an event handler, or this event object, and I could say, do me a favor, prevent default. Reload this. And now I shouldn't see that refresh. I should just see my button. Okay? Well, there's a couple of ways that I could handle this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up. Notice that my button is inside of a form. So I'm going to grab that form. The way that I'm going to grab that form is one of the things you could do with jQuery is that if you have a jQuery object, you could go up the parent tree, and I'm going to say, find me the parent, that's the form element, and I'll say console.log form. I took out my prevent default. That was stupid. EV prevent default. So here, I'll see that I've got a form. I've got a different form. Notice that if I look at my form and I say form.index, I could go over here. That'll tell me 0. That'll tell me 1. Because those two forms are siblings of each other. So what's actually happening here is I'm clicking on the button. When I turn that button into a jQuery object and I say parents, it goes up, grabs the form. The form has siblings. Therefore, it's got an index. This is 1. This is 0. Now, I know that 0 is the office's picker. So I'm going to go over here and I'll say var list. Okay? Index equals 0. Then my list is from offices. Otherwise, I know it's from stores. Okay? I'm also going to make my life a little bit easier by putting in this sort of mode and saying, hey, look, if my index is 0, then my mode is going to be offices. Otherwise, my mode is going to be stores, and I'll show you where I'm going to use that. So what I want to do here is I want to find out the office. Let's just do a console.log mode, and we should see, if we click on this first one, it says offices. Second one says stores, but notice nothing is changing here. What I want to do here is I want to find the particular office or the particular store. So the way that I'm going to do that is that I've got my form, and what I really want to do is I want to find my select object that's within that form. And I'm going to use my $sign, say find me the select object, find the one that's within the form, and if I say console.log select, and I click on this, it'll show me my select object. This will show me a different select object. One of the things that I could do with the select object, jQuery allows me to find the selected value that's selected. And this is something we could sort of test out here. So this is my second store. That should be an ID of 2. That should be an ID of 1. This is going to be 1. This is going to be 2. And this is going to be 3. Now what I need to find is the appropriate store or office that's related to that. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to say ID equals select.val. And I'll go over here and I'll say item, take the list, filter the list. Okay? Filter it based on the item that I'm looping over. And I'm going to return where the item's ID is equal to the ID. And when you end up getting a value from a select object, it's just going to be a string. I'm just going to multiply it by 1. So this should tell me my item, I filtered it. I only want the first one. I shouldn't get more than one because they're IDs, they're unique. And I'll say console.log item. Mitchell. So now if I go over here, this is going to give me the SL office. This will give me the ESB office. This will give me the SL store, the ESB store. And the only thing really left to do is to specify, hey, look, if the mode is equal to offices, then what I'm going to do, on add office item. If the mode is equal to stores, I'm going to say on add store. Let's just see if that closes the loop here. So now I'm visiting my Empire State Building store. On add office is not a function, so let's see. Why not? Here are my visit pickers. So here are my visit pickers, and here I need to put in on add office, on add store. By the way, the visit pickers never need to get re-rendered. They're not really changing at all. Okay? If you decided, hey, look, once I ended up adding it, I don't want to add it twice, that's another story. Then you might want to go and re-render them. But since we're not doing that, now I should be able to modify my office, be able to modify my store, go in and add some stuff for my second day, add a store for my second day, and you can see that they get retained when you end up navigating between these. Again, nothing. Thank you very much. Nothing going on here with the map. So the big takeaway here, and I think it's important, is that if we just isolate these three functions, okay, it should be apparent that these three functions are really just responsible for what? Rendering, right? No logic that's in here, but again, if something interesting is going to happen, I pass in some function, like here on my visit pickers, I pass in on add office. And when in fact I'm on an office, I call on add office with the office. And what this allows me to do is that anything that's happening really with anything sort of related to my state, which is really the most important part of your application, I'm able to isolate it really from these 5 things, right? If you think about it, those are the 5 things that are happening. You're either selecting a day, You're removing an office, removing a store, adding a store, or adding an office. And don't forget that there would be nothing that would prevent me from taking this code out, my day picker. Nothing would prevent me from taking it out, putting it into another file. Nothing would prevent me from taking this day view out, putting it in another file. They're all really independent. Nothing would prevent me from taking out my visit pickers and putting them in another file as well. I'll leave it as an exercise, but it wouldn't be hard to do if you could think about it. Imagine having some method on add day, which would simply probably look something like this. State.days.push some object, and probably you'd want that to be the new day if you were adding the day, and so you'd probably then do something like state.index state.days.length -1, and in which case you'd probably at that point want to render your day picker again, right? On add day is not going to take anything. This is just going to end up inserting a day. And I would leave that to you to set up the UI that would end up wiring that up. All right, let me stop this recording.